Birds are simple. They mate, they fly, they forage. They shouldn't be in your home or in a cage. The problems with domesticated birds: parrots, parakeets, toucans, three cans. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights. Brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, birds. They're forever. You take one home from a store, and unlike a cat or a dog, you're caring for a bird for the rest of your life, if all goes well. Which is why there are bird rescues and bird people like Christina Matthies, a PETA VP for content. She's also PETA's resident bird person. She says most people just don't know what they're getting into when they take on a bird companion. Here's my conversation with PETA VP Christina Matthies. We begin talking about her role as editor-in-chief of PETA's Global Animal Times on the PETA Podcast. So tell me about the Global Times, right?
Yeah, so it's PETA Global. Mm-hmm. So it used to be the Animal Times. So it's kind of the PETA Global Animal Times. It's larger now. And in it, we talk about all the things that we've done for animals. And we kind of make sure we talk about every type of animal because, as you know, like our work is so diverse. So we want people to know exactly what we're doing and exactly what they can do to help directly in their everyday lives. So it's information and a tool.
Yeah, and as the editor-in-chief, you are, and by virtue of doing this podcast now on this subject, you are proclaiming a kind of bias toward birds.
Yes. I was born a bird person. And it's kind of funny. You know, I feel like my son was born a music person. He can play the trombone. You're just kind of born a certain way. And my daughter's like I am. And I'm like my mom was. Bird people are just their own type of people.
Well, tell us, what is a bird? Because I'm sure if you're proclaiming your bias toward birds, there's got to be a lot of people out there who have that. I mean, the birders are out there. They go crazy. And aren't we in bird counting season? Are we close?
Well, I mean, I think that's like all year round where I am.
Yeah.
So a lot of people get into the birds who are left alone. You can help like different universities by seeing, migration patterns. But for me, my focus is really on birds who are kept inside. So we've got anything from, the finches or doves, various types of parrots, parakeets. So they're all parrots is a vast category, but all of them are very different. And bird people, we can really notice how complex they are, how emotional they are, how they're as interested in us as we are in them.
Yeah, but so you really make a distinction between the birds, the migratory birds, the songbirds, the outdoor birds, and the birds who've been domesticated in some ways, right? I mean, they're different. I mean, they're the same because some of those birds that are brought inside in cages were songbirds, were outdoor birds.
Yeah, the difference like between birds and dogs and cats is birds are not domesticated. So dogs and cats had thousands of years of domestication, and parrots are only a few generations removed from their ancestor who was literally just taken from his or her nest and plopped into a cage. So they've never been domesticated. They don't play a role either. So like they didn't come in as, say, barn cats or anything like that. They're truly kind of a decoration, a novelty, and they've really paid the price for that.
Well, what you're saying, though, is if they've never really been truly domesticated, that means when people take them into their homes, that's not a good thing.
No, they suffer terribly. They don't get a chance to be a true bird. So you could not release, you can't take a parrot who came from the Amazon, go back to the Amazon, and then release that parrot because they learn how to be human and they're at a disadvantage. And everything that they instinctually want, they can't have, which is to mate, to fly, to forage. They're finding food for them is intellectual stimulation. It's almost everything to them. It's not easy. They don't get something in a cup. So it's exercise, stimulation, and they are huge. They all need flocks and they need that one mate and they bond for life, up to 80 years. So you can have a bird, who has a wedding anniversary that none of us will ever see. And they are still with the same bird.
Wow. Yeah. Like, Kathy and I are celebrating 30 something years. We're kind of bird-like in that sense, I guess.
Yes, I know. I always tell my husband that we're getting ready to, our 25th is in May.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm like, this has been too long. No, just kidding.
No, but not as long as a bird. So you still got some ways to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about, all right, they're not domesticated. They don't belong in cages, and we're going to get to that a bit later. But I'm sure people are kind of surprised to hear that about birds that they bring into the home. And in general, do people treat their birds well in the home that you find?
There's a difference between abuse, like outright abuse, but there are the people who follow what industry tells them to do. So you think about, you've got the price of the bird, they pay for the bird, but then along comes the treats and the toys and the cages. So it's a huge industry and they are sold a bird and they're not given the information that they need. And that information really wasn't available to people until the internet. And then when you go on those sites, you also have breeders who have a vested interest in keeping this going. And they will fight those facts with, I guess, their own alternative facts. And I kind of differentiate from those people who stumble upon, like, I want this beautiful bird, we will love this bird. And then they find out, oh my gosh, this is not what I signed up for.
Yeah. So it becomes, they understand it's like an on the job training. Mm-hmm. And then by then it might be too late.
Yes. And what they do is they realize they're in over their heads. Sanctuaries are full. Some sanctuaries have kind of gone into a hoarding type status, which is dangerous for the humans and for the birds. But it is very hard to say no when someone says, please take my bird, So there are certain sanctuaries where you're like, they're not doing the right thing. And it could be because they also stumbled into that as well. But until we have homes for all of the parrots who are living 30, 40 years, we need to not breed anymore. They need to come first. And you've got, you look at the dog and the cat life span and the commitment you're making. So when you go adopt a dog, you're making a commitment and, 15, 18 years. And then you buy this parrot who was sold to you and they were hand fed, to be even more attractive to you. Right. And you bring them home and then you find out they're going to be 40, 50, 60 years of a commitment. And you've got kids who are moving out, you've got kids who are having their own kids. Yeah. And then you move to an apartment, you find, say you're hard on financial times, you fall on hard times. Having a bird is expensive, and a lot of apartments will not allow cockatoos and other birds who are very loud.
Wow. I mean, it's almost like when you decide to get a bird, you got to think about all these things. And you don't really think about, I'm going to have to get my bird Medicare when I get Medicare.
Yeah,
because the
exactly.
bird is going to live that long. I mean, not to make light,
Yeah.
but it's almost so tragic a situation that the only thing you can do is make light of it because people go into being a bird, getting a bird companion because they are companions, uh,
Yeah.
right? And
And they are loyal companions.
yeah,
That's the one thing about a bird. They bond to you and they will, I always talk to my daughter. I'm like, they're your ride or die. These birds are your ride or die. They will never leave you. They will always back you, protect you. They are loyal to you. And then some people just, it crushes them when that loyalty isn't returned and they end up hurting themselves.
yeah.
And it is a very hard emotional strain on such intelligent animals.
The birds end up hurting them.
Yes, some avian vets kind of compare it to cutting
Mm.
as a release of stress or pain or anguish. And it can happen overnight.
Yeah.
You could have a parrot who's doing well, and say you went on a trip for many months and your spouse was there with your parrot. And then you get home, say hello to the bird, you go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and they've managed to pluck their chest feathers out and
Mm.
also tear a hole in their own skin. And once you've gone to plucking and self mutilation for them to relieve some of that anxiety and pain, it is very hard to get them back to a spot where their feathers can grow in and they do stop plucking. It's very hard.
Man, and I bet you the bird owner or the human companion to the bird, never figured that out when they weren't thinking about that when they went to the pet store or when they got a bird from.
No,
They don't get do they get them from breeders mostly or just the pet stores or they don't catch them or do they?
no. There is an illicit bird trade. So the U.S. banned the importation in the 90s of parrots from other countries. So but there are illicit bird trades elsewhere. There's a way to get birds. Some of them are really rich collectors and want that certain jewel for their collection.
Right.
And in order to have a certain parrot, you need incredible paperwork. And they used to smuggle baby birds out and they'd put them in plastic bottles that, many didn't live. But if you're going somewhere and you're pulling a little baby out of the tree, that's really not much effort you put into it.
Yeah.
But then now they're like turning to egg smuggling.
Wow.
So they'll take the eggs because they're easier to transport and they can get tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for certain birds. But I find that mainly kind of a European, that now Europe is dealing with it.
Still, it's almost like a status thing among the super rich who become bird. They get ensconced in the bird subculture, and they say, "Well, I could buy a Bentley, or I could buy this bird," and they
Yeah.
buy the bird, and then you might have their own aviary and a guy or a gal or a caretaker, and they just go. That would be an eccentric billionaire somewhere who has a
Yes.
bird fetish or something.
hmm
Boy, but this bird subculture, you're tapping into this for PETA podcast listeners. This subculture does exist.
It does. And most of the people who are like in over their heads, they will say, their brother-in-law's cousin has a cockatoo who is too loud. One thing that people don't remember, cockatoos' voices were designed to reach across an entire forest to
Oh,
to talk to their flock mates. Same with macaws, different parrots. And cockatoos and other large parrots love to mimic the noises that hurt our ears the most, like fire alarms or microwaves. They don't automatically come up to you and start saying, "Hey, my name's so and so." You see these talking birds,
yeah.
but really the noises they like are the ones that are shocking. So you'll have a good natured person be like, I could provide this cockatoo a home. And they'll take the cockatoo in and they don't realize, the cockatoo will eat everything. They'll eat, you can't keep them in their cage all the time. They'll pluck out their feathers. They're miserable. You let them out, they'll eat everything you have, wood. I mean, it's a perpetual state of destruction because that's what they're supposed to be doing naturally.
What if you got a cat?
Yes, exactly. If you have a cat, you're also shortchanging the cat. So we have birds that we have rescued, and they are
Rescue
upstairs.
birds. Yeah.
Right. And we know our limit because we know, we've looked into it, and we have rescued parakeets, and we are able to keep our house safe. We're able to keep them safe where the cats cannot encounter them. So you do have to kind of choose.
This is fascinating to me because I just thought we would be talking about mostly, bird watching. I mean, we've got a backyard, we've got finches, and the finches come in and we can see the hummingbirds, with their, what is it, snouts or their pipe?
Yeah.
What do they call the hummingbirds hummer?
I don't know. I was
The
thinking
beak. Yeah. Their beak. But, and they're fascinating, the hummingbirds. So, and then sometimes we have crows and we have hawks sometimes. So I thought we were going to talk about outdoor birds, but this is kind of an inside job, huh?
It is. And, I tend to look inside because I know those birds on the outside are doing what they're meant to do. And if they're being left alone, like the laws concerning, dove hunts is something that we work on as well. But if you're looking, for crows, everything like that, most of them are living the life they were meant to be, allowed to fulfill their instincts.
Living the crow life.
Exactly.
Or we get blue jays, we get sparrow. I mean, really the number of birds, and we got one tree that, well, you put the bird seed out and you get everyone, all the finches and all the people who like finch food, and the finches like a certain food, and so I felt like I knew something about birds, but now we're talking about the inside birds, the parakeets, the cockatoos, the birds that people take into their homes, and the rescue birds that you were talking about, you're rescuing them from owners who weren't able to take care of the birds, right? I mean,
yes.
I mean, that's really the situation. Birds in bad situations, that's when the rescue bird or person like yourself comes in and helps.
Exactly. Our first parakeet, my daughter, really loves birds, and she's 22, so she's really their point person. But our first parakeet was rescued by PETA. A woman had, I think they bought 2 parakeets for their daughter, and she went away to college. And one of the parakeets died. The other parakeet was lonely, and she just didn't feel like she could take care of the parakeets on her own. So she called PETA.
Oh, and so this is a common thing. Heaven forbid they should just abandon the parakeets and say, take the cage they want to like get rid of and say, well, you were born free. I'm going to let you live free. And they abandon the birds, or they set them free. That's not a good idea, right?
No. And I have heard of people who do that, misguided, but they need to be aware the parakeet will die. Another bird will eat the parakeet.
Right. Small.
So they don't, depending upon where you are in the country, the weather extremes, they're not built for the weather extremes. They don't know how to forage for food. So you are really killing them slowly when you do that.
Can people turn them into a shelter, or do they do that?
Some shelters will take birds, and they really do a good job. They try to find the perfect home for them. Our another parakeet, Coconut, was given to the Virginia Beach SPCA, and her fellow parakeet apparently was killed by the family's cat. So when Coconut reached the SPCA, she was doing this awful cry. It was just an anxiety-ridden cry. She could barely breathe.
Right.
So she did this for about 24 hours, and PETA's like, let's find her a home. They asked me if I could take her. And when PETA got here, the sound coming out of the bird, she hadn't stopped at all. And it was heart-wrenching. So usually you're supposed to quarantine birds because they could possibly have a disease that could spread. In this case, I kind of made a snap judgment because I don't believe she was going to live. She wasn't eating, drinking, and I just put her with the other birds, and she just stopped. She felt safe. It took her about 48 hours before she could actually hold herself upright. And I had phoned a vet. So an avian vet is necessary to have in your circle, your team, if you are going to adopt a bird. And they agreed that it was more emotional. And this, after she had stopped, she wasn't in danger, but just the strain on her little body from crying so hard.
And mostly from missing her partner
Mm-hmm.
and just being away in a new place. And so she just expressed herself.
Yes. And she is now in a flock of 4.
Wow.
And they're buddies. They're happy. One of our parakeets, I don't know how this happened, but my niece called me up. We moved right up the street from them. And she's like, there's a parakeet in our pool. And I ran down there, and the bird flew right into the pool. And if my nieces hadn't been swimming, then she would have drowned. And I tried to find out why, where this parakeet came from. Did the next door thing, like, are you missing a parakeet? But I put 2 and 2 together. There's a Petco about 1.5 miles if you fly near my home. And I believe this may have been a botched delivery.
Wow.
And she got loose.
And so when the parakeets go flying around, I guess, I mean, if you let a parakeet free from a cage in your home, they'll come back to the cage, right?
Yes.
I mean, and you don't have to worry about it going out the door and like getting lost. It'll come back.
Well, you do have to be very careful once, you're doing the flight time, which is, all day, really.
Yeah.
You need people who are aware in your home.
Yeah.
No windows can be open. I don't trust it even to let a breeze in, because a screen could have a hole you didn't notice. Once a bird is lost, it is very difficult to get them back, simply because they are so afraid and panic takes over. Yeah. So you need to make sure that your home is completely secure before you let the birds. And that includes poisonous plants, getting rid of them. You should never have the cookware that is the nonstick cookware is a poison to them. Never cook with we had to get rid of all of our pots and pans and replace them.
Boy, it is so, I mean, before someone goes to buy a bird, I doubt if they know half the things that they need to know about owning a bird. I mean, and so I guess that would explain why bird rescue is a necessary thing. But do birds end up getting rescued by people like yourself and others, or do they just kind of suffer?
I think a lot of times they get passed along to families. A friend will volunteer, and then they realize they're out of their depth, and then so for each lost bond to a parrot is a heartbreak on a level that as humans we can't understand. So my husband is out somewhere doing something, but parrots aren't like that. They never separate. So they're within feet of each other at all times throughout their entire bond. So this bird is forming bonds, broken, and they end up just taking it out on themselves to release some of that anguish.
Wow, they're kind of masochistic in that way.
Yeah, they just can't get out of the feeling of being so utterly devastated, and they don't know how to express it. And so they take it out on themselves, and it is just anguish on a different scale.
Well, and all this because a situation that is not natural. People take the birds and bring them into their home, and they don't care for their new companions. What would be the natural habitat for a parakeet like that? Some of these parakeets are bred. and that's a bad thing. But where do they exist naturally in the wild? Or I guess are they just in the
I think
songbird?
parakeets are mainly kind of a human invention. You've got budgies; they're not as long living,
Mm.
but they're mainly, pet store.
Ah,
They're they're small birds. They're affordable birds. They're last minute purchases where you go in and you think, oh, this bird is cute. I'll take him or her home. Um, I kind of consider them starter birds
mm.
where people get a little looped in by them, and they're not as complicated as, say, a bigger parrot. But just because they don't express themselves as much doesn't mean they don't need as much.
Well, is it worth it to be a human animal companion?
No, it's beyond awful. I think there's so many things that people who are concerned about birds can do, and they get to be around birds. So you could find a local sanctuary, and really you can develop, a relationship with that sanctuary. You can volunteer. You can be there to cut up fruit in the morning. You can bring them toys. There are so many ways that you are needed that you should never buy a bird.
Never. I mean, I was going to get to that question. If people are
Mhm.
looking for an animal companion, a bird animal companion, because most of our conversation makes it sound like that is not a good idea for either human beings or the animal.
No, there's so many, many of the birds I have fostered. My mom, before she passed away, adopted 4 birds from PETA, and they were given to us from retirement centers where their person has passed away. And the retirement center, they don't have family, they don't know what to do. And so my mom had 2 lovebirds and 2 parakeets. So there's a lot of older people who are leaving birds behind. And I think only if you spend time at a sanctuary and really learn who they are, what they need, you cannot really bring a large bird into your home and think it will be successful. It is a lifetime commitment. It's a daily commitment.
So when someone comes up to you and say, I'm thinking about adopting a bird or doing a rescue bird, do you like stop them and give them like a 5-week seminar and make sure that they know everything they need to know before because it is a lifelong commitment.
It is. I do actually. I'm sure I annoy many people, and I don't let it go either. And I also am happy to help people who do have birds and want to make it work. And I encourage them to, email PETA. There is validity. I mean, you have a bird now. So you're sitting there. You've got some birds now. What do you do? What can you do to make them happier? There's so many different things you can do, and getting an avian vet on board, making sure you're feeding them fruits and vegetables outside of getting them outside of the cage, making sure that you're covering the cage during breeding time so they don't unnecessarily lay eggs that are not fertilized, because that endangers birds. They can become something called egg bound. It depletes their nutrients. So there's many things you can do at this point to make sure your bird lives a happy life. So
Yeah.
people who do have birds shouldn't despair. You
Yeah.
can
You can.
help them.
So it's not impossible to be. You're a bird owner. You rescue birds, and people who are just they may be good now, but when the kids grow up and go to college or leave, when you're an empty nester, don't forget your birds. You're not an empty nester. You still got the birds.
Exactly. You can't, go on 2-month vacations and have Joe Schmo up the street take care of your cockatoo. That would devastate your cockatoo beyond measure. It's not explainable. You cannot explain to your cockatoo, this is not permanent. I will come back.
And the cockatoo talking right to the owner, right?
Mhm.
But not really
Right.
quite understanding when you're talking to it.
No, and a lot of them do get it. I mean, they do understand certain things, But for them, they expect you to feel the same bond that they feel. And sometimes that bond is really unhealthy, because if you're not allowed to mate, and that is your one purpose in life, you will bond to a human and consider them your mate. And that is always frustrating. And it can cause, also when they're young, kind of like the juvenile stage, it can start causing aggression where they'll be biting. And when you get bitten by a parrot, it's a huge bite. It's very painful.
You've been bitten by a parrot.
Yes.
So it's not without some sense of danger. Hey, we've talked about animal companion birds, and we've talked about breeders, and we know that when it comes to dogs and cats, we talk about spaying and neutering. Is there a similar kind of thing for birds? Can you spay and neuter your bird, or what do you do with, well, you should just not go to a bird breeder, right? That's number one.
Right. And in order for birds to breed, conditions have to be right. So by changing their conditions, they will not breed. So if you end up with a male female of the same exact species, so you've got two African grays, you have to make conditions good for them to breed. But by covering like their cage, a lot of birds go from how much sun is available to them, how much light. So we make sure with our parakeets, it also keeps them healthy, that they get 12 hours of darkness. So their room, if you want to watch TV in their room, you can't. We make sure from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. that they are, sleeping during that time, so it doesn't give them.
Right. Enforced darkness. And when you catch your parakeet looking at its iPhone, that's bad for it.
Yeah. Remove Tinder, put on parental controls.
So, yeah. Well, it's all these things people don't think about until they find themselves in this dilemma. So once again, where should emails go if they have a question about birds?
info@PETA.org. So info at PETA.org.
And then put on the subject line bird question. That's good.
Yes.
And then it'll be answered. And does PETA get a number? Well, you've talked about a few, but I guess it's more than just a handful of birds that get donated to PETA by people who say, I don't know what to do.
We do. We have a lot of members too. They're getting older, and they would, they're doing the right thing, thinking, where are my birds going to go?
Yeah.
And so they'll reach out to us for help. And then there are people who, PETA is really great. Like if we can't find, if we don't have someone there, we find someone. But sometimes when it comes to birds, it is a difficult thing. It's not easy to do overnight, because you can't just take a chance on someone. You can't just say, okay, I think Judy is trustworthy. Judy might be the best person, but she might not be the best person for a bird.
Yeah. And don't think that, you come back and, after your 2-month or 1-month vacation and your bird's going to be okay, or that your bird's going to be okay when you give the bird to someone. There's these psychological things that people don't think about that are real with birds, and they show it.
I've had emails from people where they're like, I borrowed my friend's parrot for a month to see if I could be a parrot parent. And I kept thinking, I understood their rationale. I thought it was great that they wanted practice, but that wasn't good for the parrot. So, we talk more about it, and then they find out different ways to help birds. There's so many volunteer opportunities where you can have hands-on help for birds, and you can leave knowing you're doing a good thing.
So it's like being an aunt instead of
Exactly.
a mother. You can be
a bird auntie.
A bird auntie. It's just, Chrissy, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this because like I said, I thought we were going to talk birding and looking at all the pretty goldfinches in the yard, and oh look, there goes that looks like a falcon, right? That looks like one of those.
Hmm.
But we're talking about really the basic home version of bird that people see, and they're not necessarily domestic, or they're not domesticated. That's one thing that came out of this. People now
Hmm.
know, but they are kind of bred for this thing, which is kind of the immoral thing. That if the breeders were gone, the appetite for this would not be here, and all the bad things that come out of that would not be there to be dealt with.
And there's, when you have pet stores, they'll have parrot mills where they're just bred and bred and bred. And, some die, some are ignored. If you look at PETA's investigation into, I think it's called Rainbow World Exotics, where you can look at the video of Angel's story. So Angel was a little cockatoo and she was sick and they were feeding her and feeding her. She was a baby, so they hand raised them to make them more desirable. And they didn't do anything when her head fell back. She had flies on her. She couldn't protect herself, and she was visibly ill. And they just said no to vet care, and she died, obviously. And they're just viewed as money. And you've got to look at like intelligence. As we understand intelligence, the joke bird brain. If someone called me that, I would actually find that a compliment, because it's really the ratio of the size of your brain to the size of your body. And you've got that, like elephants, you look at this, and birds are incredibly, incredibly intelligent, which means they can also be really mischievous, and they can find trouble, where you'll see birds who can open up your cabinets. They can do a childhood lock, get through it and get what they want. So they're extremely intelligent. And it's something that breaks my heart when that intelligence isn't met every day.
Yeah. And birds can fly.
Yes.
And we can't do that.
Every cell in their body is engineered for flight. So when you take that away, if you can allow them to fly in your home, but if you've got a macaw who, can fly 50 miles in one day, you will never fulfill that. They should not be in our homes.
So big birds shouldn't, if you're going to have a bird, you can rescue a macaw, but a macaw should not really, that's not where macaws are supposed to be.
No.
They should be. Yeah, rainforest. Yeah. Where should the macaws be?
Yeah, rainforest. I think like Costa Rica. Yeah. And unfortunately, all of these birds are becoming more and more endangered as they come more and more into our homes. So you see this surplus population of unwanted birds here, and you see the birds in nature. They're being killed off in order to feed this, and it's devastating.
Yeah. Well, Chrissy, it's been fascinating talking about birds. I know Maya Angelou wrote the book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, but I did not know why the caged bird does not sing.
Yes.
And now I do. They get their mate taken away. They don't, they want to, they don't get enough darkness. They don't get enough care from their domestic partner, their human domestic partner.
Mm-hmm.
So much needs to be learned before you take on the role of being a bird companion, a human bird companion. So I hope listeners, I'm sure listeners got something out of this, especially if they thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a bird, especially like on Valentine's Day, right? To buy the love birds. How many people get sucked in by that, huh?
Mm-hmm. It's sad. And I do think people who love birds have a lot of opportunities to fulfill that. there's many ways you could help wildlife rehabbers. Say if you're interested in birds of prey, there's many who rehab them. There's many parrot sanctuaries who would love donations in order to expand or in order to provide them with more toys. So there's a lot of ways you can still love birds without leading or giving into this horrible overpopulation crisis.
Great. And Chrissy, the editor of the...
Well, technically PETA Global, but we really call it like Global Animal Times because it used to be Animal Times.
Right. And so tell me, what's your favorite bird story in the Global Animal Times?
Well, in the one that we'll be mailing to members, Ingrid talks about the parrots who PETA rescued a long time ago. And she tells you the story of how they were teasing people as much as people tease them. And it's a very cute story. And we are doing so much to help birds who are in labs. And you wouldn't think, okay, I'm just going to experiment on a bird. You usually see mice, rats, and yet birds are horrifically experimented on. And we are doing so much in order to get them out of labs. And our autumn issue, which will probably hit mailboxes around October. I think it mails October 22nd. So all of our members will be able to read a lot about what PETA is doing for birds.
Wow. So the vivisector, so you got to get the birds out of the labs and really out of the home. Got to get them out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need to be where they're meant to be, really flying, left alone, looking after their own interests, and you can watch them through binoculars or bird watching.
Chrissy Matthies, the Vice President of PETA, Editor-in-Chief of the Global Animal Times. Thanks for being on the PETA Podcast.
Thanks, Emil.
Chrissy Matthies is a PETA VP and Editor-in-Chief of PETA's Global Animal Times magazine. Incidentally, Matthies wanted us to know that, yes, budgies indeed live in the wild in Australia, but the store-bred budgies generally are a different animal with bright feathers intended to appeal to buyers. Check the next issue of the Global Animal Times this month, and for more info on birds, check out the website at PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends, bird lovers and whatnot, animal lovers all. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or see my vlog at amok.com, or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, or you can subscribe to, as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by CarbonWorks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.